Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining us from around the world. Really appreciate your time joining us for this wonderful seminar. And first, thanks to our partners, CAE, the Council for Aid to Education, for helping to make this possible. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. For me personally, here in Melbourne, Australia, it's the Bunwarong people of the East Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we have got a great session lined up for you today. You'll hear presentations from each of the three panelists, then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And so really appreciate everyone's attendance today, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A. Shorter questions you can also drop into the chat. We may get a chance to address those as we go, but we'll certainly allow time. We've allocated enough time at the end for some great questions and answers. And what you'll be hearing is first from Professor Kevin Ashford-Rowe on career readiness at the Queensland University of Technology, and then Dr. Doris Zahner discussing measuring learning outcomes, and then I'll have a few words to say about the importance of personalized evidence. So our panel today, fantastic opportunity, and thank you both for joining us. Professor Kevin Ashford-Rowe is a Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Digital Learning at the Queensland University of Technology. He's the institutional lead for digital learning, and he also leads the university's Learning and Teaching Unit. And Dr. Doris Zahner is the Chief Academic Officer at CAE, the Council for Aid to Education, where she is the Chief Academic Officer, where she provides thought leadership and oversees all research and development studies pertaining to CAE's performance-based assessments. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Without further ado, I think let's dive right into it. So Kevin, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And while we're moving to the first slide, I might also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm coming, which are the Turrbal and Yugara peoples. And we're on QUT's Kelvin Grove campus, which has for 60,000 years continuous inhabitation, been a place of both learning, gathering, research, and community engagement. And I pay respects to their elders past, present, and future. So the topic, ostensibly in a broader sense, is in and around micro-credentials and their place and how we're looking to manage the struggle. What I probably should say is that, just to give colleagues outside of Australia some context, QUT is a university that sits across two campuses. We are a large unit. Most of the 40 public universities in Australia are large. We're one of two or three that has more than 50,000 students enrolled. We have two physical campuses, and in fact, we actually have three campuses, because our third campus is our digital campus, which sits across both of those campuses. We're very strong nurse educator, teacher educator. We're also very strong in sciences, engineering. And our tagline is that we are the university for the real world. And that's been a very strong brand proposition for us for many years in the Brisbane and the Australian market. And it's something that's very much integrated into our DNA. So it's more than a tagline. It is part of what we think about and how we operate. So from a career readiness perspective at QUT, there are a number of angles that we can take this from. And I spoke initially about being the university for the real world, and a large part of our proposition as a university that has an awful lot of students who come from less traditional backgrounds and maybe don't necessarily have the cultural capital that you would expect from being third, fourth, even second generation university participants. We have an awful lot of students who don't have that and who are first in family. So we recognize that lots of our students select QUT because they actually want to be, they perceive us as a university that is going to prepare them and set them up for a career, that we're going to give them the education and the training and the broader skill sets that are going to enable them to succeed beyond university. A large part of that for us is nested in our approach to work integrated learning. So and this is part of us looking to ensure that we act true to our mission of being the university of the real world. So we make a pledge that every student at QUT will be involved in a work integrated learning experience, which means that they will have an opportunity to go out into a workplace and at some point in their education, take their skills into that workplace and understand what it means to make that transition from the world of higher education to the world of work. As you'll understand, that can be challenging, and it requires an awful lot of effort and community engagement. We also are very clear about recognizing and identifying the skills that students present with, and I think micro-credentials is probably one way that we can more, as we move forward, mature that conversation even further. We have a whole range, as most universities in Australia would, of means of recognizing the skills that potential students present with, and how we might help to identify those skills and pass them into some recognition of prior learning for existing courses. We have strong connections with industry across all of our discipline areas, and one of the things that we do look to do from that perspective is think about how we take those industry connections and think about how we obtain benefits from those industry connections, not just in the learning and teaching space, or not just in the research space, but also through into the learning and teaching space as well. So I think it probably is true to say that we are educating for the workplace. I've been here now for 3.5 years. One of the things that struck me when I first arrived was how deeply the notion of being the university for the real world actually was embedded into systems and processes. We have a commitment that every unit will contain authentic assessment, or authentic assessment will be used in at least part of the assessment regime for students. And we have a curriculum mapping tool that allows us to workflow the curriculum design process through to what's being taught using the learning management system. And actually, you do find that you are able to track the amount of authentic assessment that is being used through the university. And to me, that was something that I found quite remarkable when I first arrived here, that not only were we saying that we were doing these things, but we were able to track and identify through the curriculum where that was true. All of this, of course, is a constant work in progress, something that we're constantly reflecting on, thinking about. And then you have a new challenge like micro-credentials that suddenly arrive in the sector. And part of the challenge for us is thinking about where and how we both integrate those approaches to micro-credentials consistently into our current experience, and also think about how some of the ways that we currently do business might be shaken up, or to use Clayton Christensen's phrase, disrupted by the advent of micro-credentials. So I think I'm ready for the next slide, actually, Dan. So if I had a magic wand for both QUT and HE institutions, what is required to meet future need? Well, I think the first thing I should say is probably if I had a magic wand, I would be much more selfish than thinking about what could I do magically to help the sector and the institution I work at. And I think I'd be, if I had 3 wishes, I might save the last one, but I'd probably be doing something for myself. I think if I had a magic wand, in terms of thinking about what's required to meet future need, and I think we'll probably come onto this conversation a little bit more broadly when we talk about our Queensland micro-credentialing community of practice. I think that we are probably an industry that is about to, or is in the process of undergoing the digital disruption that we've seen many other industries go through. I think we've had little bits of that have impacted us in higher education, but I think it's coming our way. I think if I had a magic wand, what I would really like to see would be joined up tertiary ecosystems that enabled students to move seamlessly from school education through to the workplace, being able to demonstrate and evidence what they'd achieved from a curriculum perspective, as well as maybe from a broader perspective through their pre-tertiary experiences in schools, and that can include employment beyond schools, and almost, if you like, create portfolios that had clear and consistently agreed value that enabled them to present those to different institutions and organizations where they could add to. And that's whether they were able to complete a full degree or whether they had to drop out partway through a degree, but other than dropping out with nothing, they were able to drop out with some kind of acknowledgement of their achievement in the form of a certification. The next slide, I think, Dan, we might have, so I think probably I've covered off on most of what's on that slide already, but again, happy to talk a bit more about our cross-sector working party or community of practice. But again, but yes, very much from my perspective, I think when there is disruption, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that that the purpose of education is to educate learners. And yes, we do have to make money to succeed, to be able to continue to do that. But what should be driving us is thinking about the ways that we create and curate those ecosystems that enable our students to succeed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. And a reminder for everyone, feel free to pop questions into the Q&A as we go. And I love that tagline, University for the Real World. And as you reinforced, Kevin, the authentic assessment is such a critical aspect, and connecting that ultimately with industry. One assessment is at the heart of what Doris will be talking about next. So again, thank you, Kevin, and let's jump across to you, Doris.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about how do we close the gap between learning and assessment and moving into the workforce. So next slide, please. Just a little bit about CAE. Dan mentioned the Council for Age Education. So we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to improve student learning outcomes. And whether that is critical thinking and problem solving, like we have in our flagship assessments, or customized assessments for institutions, we kind of do it all. We were originally part of the RAND Corporation until 2005, and we measure critical thinking, problem solving, and written communication skills, which are essential skills for success in both academics and career. So up till today, we've measured student skills over 800,000 students at 1,300 institutions worldwide. And we partner with Edalex to deliver evidence-based microcredentials based upon the assessments of critical thinking for our students. So here's the situation. Critical thinking, problem solving, and written communication are essential, as I said. And proficiency in these skills is predictive of post-academic and career outcomes, as evidenced by the research that both myself and other colleagues out there have shown. But these skills are rarely explicitly taught or measured, and they're almost never reported on transcripts. So when students graduate from university and they're entering the workforce, they have their grades reported as well as these transcripts, but hiring managers don't know what these skills are in terms of critical thinking, problem solving, communication. And this is problematic because even these employers are basically saying that the applicants lack these skills, even though they're graduating with high GPAs. Next slide. So why are these skills important? They've been shown actually to be the skills that have been consistently ranked by employers as most important over time, on top of content knowledge. So you assume that students who are graduating with a higher education degree have content knowledge within their field of study, but these are the skills that employers are looking for beyond content knowledge. I'm going to actually be talking about these students in a little bit. We surveyed 552 students at a leading US business school from a public university. So these are undergraduates entering. And we surveyed them. 95% of these students basically said that critical thinking and problem solving are valuable for their careers. But there's a gap in what students and employers want and what the current reality is. So this is from a survey of 64,000 managers that PayScale ran. This survey showed that 60% of hiring managers say that recent college graduates don't have the necessary skills in critical thinking and problem solving, and 44% say that they lack in proficiency in writing. So this is outside survey research. Our own research at CAE, which is the next slide, actually show that upon entry into higher education, up to 60% of our students on our sample are not proficient in critical thinking, problem solving, or written communication. And by the time they're ready to graduate, 40% of them are still not proficient, as evidenced by a standard setting study that we conducted. And the research also shows that students who do better on CAE's higher education assessments of critical thinking and problem solving are more likely to have positive academic and career outcomes, as measured by higher cumulative GPA at the end of their senior year, so as they graduate, and also positive post-university and career outcomes as measured by employment, salary, graduate school enrollment, and employer ratings. So we followed a set of students, about 1,000 of them, for a year post-graduation to see where they were in terms of their careers. And we found that there was an association between better critical thinking skills as measured by our assessment and better outcomes after they graduated. So what is it exactly that we measure? Well, we're looking for, as we mentioned, critical thinking and problem solving in terms of data literacy, critical reading, and critiquing arguments, as well as written communication. So how well can students write? And do they adhere to grammar for the written language? So how do we improve this? What can we do to help improve the skills so that students are prepared for graduation and then workforce? Well, we look at authentic assessments, and Kevin mentioned this before with his program with authentic assessments. We make assessments that are real world based. So students are situated in scenarios that they might encounter in their first job or as an intern while they're at university. And we ask them to recommend a solution using information that's provided to them. But what's very unique about the assessment itself, but sort of emulating the real world, is that there's no single right answer. So just like in the real world, you might encounter a problem that's very complex and there's not a single right answer, but how you justify your solution and recommendation is really what is being measured. That's what is critical thinking and demonstrating critical thinking and problem solving skills. Thanks for that, Kevin. And here's just an example of a performance task in case people wanted to see a concrete piece. So students, again, are put into a scenario. So they were just hired as a consultant for a transit authority, and there was a big storm that came through that damaged the commuter rail, which connects two cities across a river. And the students have to make a decision as to whether they should completely shut down this commuter rail for 3 months or do a partial shutdown of nights and weekends, which will last 7 months. So it's a decision and a trade-off that they have to make. And they're presented with all this information in terms of documents with, things like alternative measures of transportation, the population that's being affected. And there's no right answer. It's really just about how do they think about the problem and how do they justify their decision given the information that they have. So they're supposed to use evidence from the documents to support their recommendation. So this is just an example that the students might see in terms of a performance task. And then I wanted to actually show a specific case study. So this, the set of 552 students that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk is from Texas A&M, the Mays Business School. So this is an undergraduate program, and their goal was to improve the ability of students to think critically and problem solve, right? So they want to be able to, they know their students are graduating with content knowledge, but they want to be able to prepare them for the workforce, specifically in critical thinking. So the way that we've done this, the program is they're assessing all incoming students to have a baseline in terms of where they are in their skills. The students are issued individual reports, and then the assessment data are reviewed to determine where the specific areas are to focus in the classroom. And then there's instruction and curriculum provided to the students based upon the results of the assessment. And then students in class practice and apply each skill and subskill over using a performance task or a case over several weeks that aligns with this instruction that's provided. And at the end of their program, they're reassessed using a similar assessment and provided with a micro-credential. So by the time they graduate from their program, they should have these critical thinking skills and have evidence to demonstrate these skills beyond just a transcript, because those aren't reported on their academic transcripts. And I think that's it for me, Dan. So just a summary. Just making sure that we understand that these assessments should be authentic and reliable. And there's a way to do it that's not a multiple choice paradigm. We want to help students improve their skills. Instructional materials are very important to help develop and support these skills. And then professional development, really helping faculty understand the importance of having these skills, teaching these skills, and ways in which we could enable the students to learn. And then lastly, these micro-credentials, which helps for students to show evidence of their skills, and then they can showcase that they're prepared for their next step.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Doris. And again, I see we've had a few comments in the chat, which is great. And thank you, Kevin, for sharing that link. And as well as we go, feel free to add your questions into the Q&A. I can see some are coming through already, which is fantastic. And then in a few minutes, we'll open up for a Q&A session. Well, so again, thank you both, Kevin and Doris. I'd like to build on some of the themes that you've heard from both of them. And you heard them both talk about the importance of skills, clearly, the importance of authentic assessment. I'd really like to extend that and thinking about into the space of skills recognition and building on the fantastic research that you shared, Doris. Last year, we commissioned some market research of more than 1,000 graduates in the US. And we at its heart, we asked them one simple question: how comfortable, how confident are you in sharing information about your skills? Not your degree program, not what courses you took, but your skills. And the on one hand, surprising but perhaps not shocking result was that only 33%, only a third of those university graduates felt comfortable voicing their skills. And when we think about the skills shortage that we see around the world, and all the challenges, Kevin, that you were talking about, the importance of the real world and that education, and Doris, what you flagged around the criticality of those skills. Even those who do have them, many of them still don't have a voice, and that's what is really a key driver behind our mission at Edalex. So we really see that skills are those building blocks that enable people to demonstrate that they have the capabilities to succeed and thrive in the workplace and make a meaningful difference. That's important. So what we think about is that authentic assessment that's happening through CAE, that's happening at QUT, that's happening at colleges, universities, high schools, or formal, informal, non-formal learning around the world. How do we surface that data? And there's a concept called dark data, which means it's based on the concept of dark matter, that we know it exists, but it's untapped. We're not really sure what exactly is in there. And that, with our Credentialate platform, is around surfacing that dark data, bringing those insights to light, and ultimately supporting that learner. And we contextualize things, that data, to make it relevant for the learner, for the institution, and just as importantly for prospective employers. And this ultimately is around learner agency, and I'll dive into a number of these topics next. When we talk about skills and the skill-based ecosystem, there's a relatively new concept that's getting more and more traction, which is called RSDs, or rich skill descriptors. And these really are the building blocks working to define and clarify what we mean when we talk about a skill like critical thinking or teamwork. What does that mean? For each of us here, we'll have potentially a different understanding, different context for that. So rich skill descriptors is initially an effort coming out of the Open Skills Network, and Western Governors University has been a fantastic champion of this. But we're seeing traction and adoption and awareness around the world. Here in Australia, there's a recent report by Martin Bean and Richard Dawson for the National Skills Commission that highlighted RSDs and the fantastic potential for them to build that foundation that we can then connect in and reference these RSDs. And for those who are interested in learning more about RSDs, there's an open global library that we've made available at openrsd.com. And there you'll find rich skill descriptors created by the likes of Western Governors University, the University of Melbourne, Education Design Lab out of Washington, DC, Intrinsic Learning here in Australia, and more to come. So great opportunity to freely access those, free for others to contribute as well. So it's a fantastic resource that we hope will help rise the rising tide for all of us around the world, and make sure that we are speaking the same language, both from a human perspective, obviously, but also very importantly for the machine readable context, where applicant tracking systems are actually it's AI that's reviewing most learners' CVs for prospective roles. I referenced alignment earlier, and context is essential, and important to think about what, and Kevin, you talked about this at the beginning, the importance of that connection with industry. So recognizing what industry skills are relevant when we're talking about skills that learners are gaining from education, connecting into frameworks. These could be institutional frameworks. Many of our universities here in Australia have a graduate attributes framework that they'll look to demonstrate the development of those skills or attributes in each of their graduates. It might be an industry framework, such as Engineers Australia, or an accreditation, other peak body, or it could be a national or a global standard. So again, that's really important to help contextualize this for anyone who might be looking at a particular piece of evidence, and ultimately coming back again to that learner to give them a voice for their own skills. And certainly connecting in with job and labor market data, very, very important as well. This mobility and meaning for digital credentials, it's amazing that what the technology has been able to enable. If you look at some of the research that Credential Engine has done last year, they identified nearly 1 million unique credentials in the US alone. And you think at the pace at which things are developing and changing, and certainly if you look globally, that's going to be well into the millions. So the question then is, how are learners, and how is industry, and how are institutions meant to derive any sort of meaning from these millions and millions of potential credentials, and the technology for issuing digital badges, digital credentials is fantastic, with multiple badges being issued, viewed, verified every single second around the world. But the challenge and importance for all of us here is to ensure that this avalanche of digital credentials and digital badges not become an impediment in and of itself. That if you put yourselves in the shoes of a prospective employer, you might look at one digital badge at a time and try to understand, what does this mean? And I think the challenge that we're all working towards by basing this on authentic assessment and by providing personalized evidence is to ensure that these digital credentials do not turn into stickers, that they are actually something meaningful for the learner, for the institution issuing them, and very importantly for the prospective employers. And that again comes to the core of thinking about, what does it take for a learner to give them that voice, to move them from that 67% who don't feel comfortable voicing their skills, and increasing that cohort who do have that comfort level. And Kevin, you referenced, many of your students are first in family, and that's certainly something that we see all around the world, and it's been coined, the new majority learner, that they're not the traditional student straight out of high school, so they may be returning, a whole bunch of different drivers. So what are the ways in which we can provide that evidence and that meaning for the learner? And from a Credentialate perspective, that's through the quantitative, so the scores, but more importantly, the qualitative feedback. So giving them, again, voice on how they've been assessed through authentic assessment. But then we also have extended that concept of evidence to artifacts. So one example is we're working with a university in the Middle East who are reviewing and enhancing their medical imaging program. So they're looking to provide that personalized evidence, and with the ability to share artifacts, they discuss the option of sharing a 10-page detailed review of how that learner performed, or sharing a single chest X-ray that student performed, and which was assessed by the institution. Again, that output of authentic assessment, and they've opted for that single chest X-ray. Right? So that for those employees who are looking for radiographers or medical imaging specialists, just that one image can capture the abilities, the skills, and the competencies in alongside the quantitative and the qualitative feedback. So I think it's important for all of us to think about how do we deliver authentic assessment, which is a huge undertaking in itself, and that's where experts like CAE and QUT have focused on work in that space for many years. And then how do we recognize it? How do we share? Because ultimately, it's all about the learner, putting the learner at the center, giving them that agency for their own selves to truly understand what their skills and capabilities are, to give them that voice, to share that with others, either from social media or through their LinkedIn profiles, but ultimately to help them engage with industry and get them out in the workforce and successful, or wherever their initiatives may lead them. So that I'll wrap up there. So we'll jump to Q&A. Again, a big thank you to Doris and the Council for Aid to Education. Big thank you as well to you, Kevin, from Queensland University of Technology. I'll stop sharing and let's jump over to the Q&A. And again, feel free to add your questions in. I see we also have quite a few in the chat as well. I'll start with one, again, based on both of you talking about authentic assessment. Yeah, interested in the challenges that you've seen in getting to this point with authentic assessment, and then that recognition from the learners as well as industry around the value of authentic assessment. So Doris might ask you first,
Sure.
and then Kevin. Yeah, I'll pick on you first.
Okay, great. So great question. Authentic assessments are challenging to make because we're trying to make the situation and the scenario something that a student or a candidate might encounter in the real world. You don't, on a daily basis, at least not that I'm aware of, answer multiple choice questions, A, B, C, D, as part of your job. And so really it's like a lot of research goes into these authentic assessments to make sure that we're measuring the skills that we say we're measuring, and that the students are engaged and are putting forth their best effort in order to answer those questions. So as far as assessment goes, it's much easier to make multiple choice items. But I think the value for both the people who are giving the assessments, the educators themselves, and also the students, even though students don't necessarily love taking tests, these tests that are authentic seem, at least from the surveys and the research that we've done, the students are more engaged and put forth more effort as a result of that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, look, I mean, authentic assessment is a particular area of research interest for me. And in fact, I did my doctoral thesis on it, partly in large part because I don't particularly necessarily believe in the paradigm that says the best way to assess all learning is via an essay or an exam, particularly an exam that's taken in a big hall with people watching over what people are doing. So I have a strong belief in authentic assessment. And I think that there is also a role for the use of increasingly designed authentic assessments that engage students earlier and more proactively through their learning, but probably has some role in helping to mitigate some of the challenges that we have around academic integrity issues and the technology fight that we're currently engaged in with cheating sites. But I think one of the things that's really important, and this speaks a bit to the question about reliability, and also I think it picks up on Doris's comments as well about authentic assessments not necessarily being easy. And in fact, as an assessment person myself, I'd say lots of multiple choice questions are actually really badly designed. So it might be quick and easy to deliver, but to deliver properly, and that's a bit harder. So I think, and I shared a link. That is a link to a website that, in the interest of full disclosure, I run. I don't make anything from it. It's an outcome from the research I did. And the research I did was really centered around, if we think that authenticity in assessment is important, and we do generally, there must be ways that we can more subjectively measure what is authentic about a particular assessment that we share, that we develop. Because if we're driving a notion that says this assessment is authentic, therefore it's going to be the successful achievement is going to be a reliable indicator of that person's ability to demonstrate something in practice, then we need to be clear about what are the specific elements that define an assessment as being authentic, and how do we then ensure that we've deliberately designed each of those elements into the authenticity of an assessment. Because I think if we're going to drive a conversation that says we want authentic assessment, it's not good enough just to say we believe intuitively that this is an authentic assessment. So a good example, I guess, would be a flight simulator and training a pilot on a flight simulator. Intuitively, we understand that we believe that would be an authentic form of assessment. But we need to be, as educators and designers of education, we need to be able to understand what are the specific components of that simulation that actually drive the degree of authenticity, to the extent that you are happy to climb into the actual plane that pilot is going to fly on their first flight out of the. And I think it also speaks to some extent down to your Middle Eastern university example of providing the chest X-ray, which I think is a probably reasonable outcome of an assessment to make a determination of someone's skills with. But what I'm more interested in as an assessor is what was the evidence of the skills that they had to aggregate and pull together that enabled them to deliver that successful outcome. And am I able, if I need to see the evidence of the steps that they went through to achieve that? And can they repeat that over and over? Because I wouldn't want my chest X-ray to be done by somebody who just got lucky once.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, very, very important clarification there. And I think that's where the quantitative and the qualitative feedback alongside that.
So the reason I shared my site is because it has on there a tool. It's a very simplistic tool, but it's basically there to assist people. If they really are interested in the degree of authenticity in assessment, it allows you to make a quick subjective analysis of the various elements that define authenticity. And if you think that the rating that it should be higher, you can work out where you might tweak your assessment to make it more valid, reliable, etc. Authentic.
Thank you, Kevin. A question I think, well, from Jason, so I'll read it out. Says, at least in terms of written communication and perhaps critical thinking, do you think this is a systemic problem? Focusing on K-12 in America. Jason, who asked it, remembers his college professors telling him in 1993 that his cohort was the worst group of writers they'd ever had the displeasure to teach. Now, 30 years later, as an adjunct professor teaching mostly 100 level courses, Jason is having a very similar experience with the undergraduates that Jason teaches. They're arriving at university with what looks to me like 7th or 8th grade level writing. So yeah, maybe Doris, I'll ask you to take a crack at that.
Yeah, I definitely think that the students are entering university without these skills, as evidenced by the research that we've done. So we had about 70,000 entering students in our sample. And of that 70,000, 60% of them are not proficient in critical thinking and written communication skills. So a huge cohort. So this problem isn't going to be fixed at the higher education level. This problem needs to get addressed in the K-12 space. And at least in America, I think there is much more awareness and there is more of a discussion and conversation about bringing up these higher order or domain agnostic skills. There are states that are going for a portrait of a graduate, which require these types of skills. However, assessment in the US in K-12 is, at least in the public schools, is still largely focused on content, ELA, math, and to some extent, social studies and science. So until there's awareness and an impetus for change, not to replace content, because content knowledge is certainly important, but to have this in addition to. And we're seeing things like social and emotional learning coming up, and we're hoping that critical thinking and written communication would be part of that as well.
Great, thank you. And yeah, clearly it is a systemic challenge, at least in the US. Kevin, your thoughts from an Australian perspective?
I really feel for teachers, school teachers. I mean, I am one by training myself, but it seems to me it's becoming an increasingly difficult job, and that curriculum, particularly in the Western world, is becoming increasingly political and increasingly contended and contentious, and so it's really difficult, I think, for teachers. And there is a finite amount of time that students can sit in the classroom, and then there's also finite amounts of time that students can concentrate on particular things. If I was to take a step back and look at the curriculum challenge and try and move it out of the political space, because it's certainly very political in Australia, I think that one of the real challenges that we have is we need to ask ourselves, how far is our curriculum being designed to prepare our school children to succeed in a digital world, as opposed to preparing our students to succeed in the industrial world? So those of us who design curriculum, our understandings of curriculum and what it takes to succeed are very often predicated in our own experiences, and none of us, I suspect, digital natives. We've all acquired these skill sets that enable us to succeed in this increasingly knowledge-based economy and digital world. And I'm not sure that we've necessarily flipped the switch in our thinking about curriculum and started to think that what is it that we need? What is it that our future students need to help them to succeed in the digital world? And if I take that one step further, it's not just the challenge from the school K-12 to tertiary transition. It's something that we constantly hear employers saying, you've not prepared your graduates to succeed in the professional world. And there's some interesting research. Gavin Moody and Lisa Wheelahan out of the University of Toronto and Australia have done some interesting research in the ways in which industry has, over the last 10, 15 years, there was a point when industry took our graduates with the understanding that they would have to contextualize their knowledge and train them to succeed in their workplace. And increasingly, industry has pushed that back to the higher education sector and sought to say, and tertiary more broadly, and sought to say, it's actually your role to prepare our graduates to succeed, to be job ready when they rock out of the university. and we're just as time poor as the school system.
And that dovetails in nicely with I think probably that we have time for one last question from the audience, which was a question for you around what is the appetite from an institutional perspective for recognizing and representing employability skills, either through performance-based testing or other means?
I think the appetite is huge. I think the challenge is going to be in execution. I think Australian universities have had graduate attributes. We sought to define what are these, for want of a better description, softer skills that we believe will enable students to succeed in the world of work beyond just their discipline perspective. And lots of us have spent an awful lot of time developing up quite detailed learning outcomes that describe what those skills are. And some of us have sought to think about how we embed them in the context of discipline curriculum, because I think there's an interesting debate that says, do you acquire those generic softer skills outside of the curriculum, or are they better acquired, embedded in a more authentic way in the context of the curriculum? But if they are, then they need to be properly embedded in the curriculum design as learning outcomes that are also then measured and assessed, constructively aligned to the assessment, assessed as part of that course, and then evidenced on test aimers or certifications that you acquire. So I think the appetite is huge across the sector. I think there's an enormous amount of work being done, but I think it's, again, thinking really clearly about what are the skills that are going to be important, and then thinking about how you design them into the curriculum and evidence them in deliberate ways.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. And we are at time, so I want to thank you both for the fantastic work that you're doing at your respective institutions, and for taking the time in the evening for you, Doris, and this morning, Kevin, for you. So yeah, huge thanks, and thank you everyone for your comments and for joining us today. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar. So thank you again for joining us. A huge thanks, Doris and Kevin, for your presentation and the fantastic discussion, and thank you to CAE for helping make this webinar possible. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Have a great one. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.